Hello there, Pair of Pizza. Welcome to another episode of Our Haunted Travels. I'm your host, Sean Donnelly.
I'm your co-host, Marianne Donnelly.
Don't mean to be looking down at you, but we're here at the Westminster Hall Burial Grounds. And guess who's right behind us? Edgar Allan Poe. Right here, right there, right there.
This is his final burial place.
Yeah, it's third.
We'll take you and show you his other spots later.
I was going to say that.
Go ahead.
Let's go check it out. But before we get into that, if you're into the paranormal history, forensic, and travel type videos,
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ding that little bell so you'll hear from us next time we post a new video.
now we can go check it out.
The Westminster Hall and Burial Grounds has origins which stretch back to 1736, when local Scots-Irish Presbyterians acquired land here for a new burial ground. It was about a mile or so from the center of a growing town where there were more than 12,000 individuals residing. The First Presbyterian Church included many of Baltimore's most affluent and influential business, military, political, and cultural leaders. The Westminster's gravestones read like a who's who of early Baltimore. The original burying ground plan contained 180 lots, each of which measured 16.5 by 8 feet. The original entrance was located on the south side, near the Sam Smith Vault, which opened onto a 10-foot avenue that bisected the graveyard. 5 smaller paths, or 42-inch alleys, also ran north-south, providing access to family lots. A second 10-foot avenue ran east and west. The Green Street carriage gates were then added in 1815. Westminster's first burial took place in 1788 and its last in 1943. The gravestones here in Westminster are nearly all of local marble, which is typical but conservative examples of their period. They include decorated tablets and slabs which are raised above the ground, and a handful of obelisks and sarcophagi exist as well. There are about 3 dozen granite vaults too. These ones, on the other hand, are built a little more extraordinarily. Over the course of the period of burials within Westminster, this can be divided into 3 periods. The early years, which was from 1788 to 1800, the Golden Age, which was from 1800 to 1840, and the late period, which was 1840s to 1940s. During the early years, the gravestones had scalloped and square tops. They were straightforward expressions of the austerity and simplicity so highly valued by the 18th century Presbyterians. During the Golden Age, elaborate burial vaults reflected the worldly success of some of the church members and their embrace of the public display of wealth. The stylish Green Street carriage gates signaled taste and sophistication. The gates and a handful of the vaults there were designed by noted architects. And during the late period, monumental displays disappeared as the wealthiest church members began burying their dead in the new rural cemeteries like Greenmount and Loudon Park. Many of the families even moved their members' remains to Greenmount. In 1850, leaders of the First Presbyterian Church decided to build a new church atop their 18th century burying ground. They hoped to serve Baltimore's growing West End and protect their burial place from being diverted for other uses. Construction began in July of 1851, and Westminster Presbyterian Church was consecrated a year later. The congregation grew steadily, adding a parish hall by the late 1850s. By early 1900s, the neighborhood was heavily commercial and industrial. Its residents, a blend of African Americans, Italians, Lithuanians, and Russian Jews. The church closed for nearly a decade but reopened in 1925 under the direction of the energetic Reverend Bruce MacDonald. Westminster's English perpendicular design is based on a late Gothic style popular around the 1380s to 1550s and is characterized by strong vertical lines, flattened arches, and simple geometric interior ornamentation. Constructed in brick with brownstone trim and a little ornamentation for a modest $26,800, Westminster's exterior was originally stuccoed and scored to resemble stone. Projecting pilasters once rose from the tower and were removed in the early 1950s after they were struck by lightning. Westminster Presbyterian Church celebrated its last service in 1977. It was then acquired by the Westminster Preservation Trust, a nonprofit created by the University of Maryland School of Law. The property was then rehabilitated and rededicated in 1983 as Westminster Hall and Burying Ground.
So I just read they built this church on top of the burial ground. You think it's haunted? Who'd you find, Mayor?
You know our Daniel Sickles story from Gettysburg?
Oh yeah.
Well, the
Our
guy,
buddy Daniel Sickles.
yeah, the guy that Daniel Sickles actually shot and killed is right there.
This guy,
Philip Barton Key II.
who was
That was
the son of Francis Scott Key.
Francis Scott Key's son.
Yeah, caught him cheating with his wife.
Yeah, his
Shot him.
name's on the other side of this.
Right? And he got away with it.
Yeah, he was the very first. It was the very first time that anyone was using the insanity plea, and he got away with it.
Daniel Sickles is a little crazy anyway. We pardon this interruption for update for this already long video.
Yes.
But we found some information after we got back, and we were doing some research for this video to make sure everything's as accurate as we could possibly get it. And we found some information about
Philip Barton Key II.
Right. Now, all over the internet, okay, including Find a Grave, it states that he is buried right where we said in our video, in the previous clip. However, there's also information out there that says he's buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C. However, his great uncle, Philip Barton Key,
Is buried there.
is buried there. So, it's a little bit confusing. Where is he at?
And why did people think he was buried here in the first place?
Right. So as we were digging into this and found some research, you haven't seen it yet, but at the end of the video, Marianne says, hey, I got a map. We actually found the original document from 1941, right?
I'm not sure what the year
I think it was 1941, which catalogs everybody who's buried in the cemetery. What does that say, Mayor, about that location?
So it actually says, and if you remember from the clip we just watched, it is pretty hard to read. You can see
Right.
Philip Barton Key, and that's why probably everybody thinks he's buried there. But in fact, his daughter, Mary Lloyd, married a guy named William Nevins, and that's his plot. And if you look at the map that I got, you'll see in the end, it actually doesn't name it as Philip Barton Key or Philip Barton Key II, and lists it as Nevins. So when I read it in the information here, it actually says that it is the carved sarcophagus of William Nevins, born in Norwich, Connecticut, blah, 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 right? Then it goes on, Mary Lloyd, wife of William Nevins and daughter of Philip Barton Key of Georgetown, D.C. Died suddenly of cholera, blah, 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 blah. So the side that we were looking at, it actually showed Philip Barton Key was one of the only things that you could read. You could read Mary Lloyd.
Yeah,
the
it's
rest of
very
it is
weathered.
very weathered. On the other side, and it's not quite as weathered, it actually does say Philip Barton Key, infant son of William and Mary Nevins. So Philip Barton Key's listed on that sarcophagus on twice.
Right.
So that's probably why people think that it's him who's buried there. But in reality, it's just his relatives.
Well, we don't know, because we went to Oak Hill's webpage
That's true.
and tried to find him. He's not listed there. It's Philip Barton Key II is the one that we were talking about.
Right.
So at this point, we actually don't know where he's at, but we're going to keep digging.
We'll keep digging. But if you know where the real Philip Barton
Let us
Key
know
II
down in the
is,
comments.
let us know. I truly believe that he's buried somewhere in D.C. because that's where he was murdered.
I don't know. And we're also down the road going to do a video about the story of Philip Barton Key.
Yeah, because it's really a
Danielson, Colson,
tie-ins.
Lafayette Square, and all that stuff like that.
Yeah.
But hey, we wanted to pop into here and say we're not sure if he's there. In the video, we said he was. Mm-hmm. He could be somewhere else. All right.
That was based on research from before we went away. Now we have this additional stuff, and we couldn't just let it go out that way.
That's right. Okay, so back to the video.
Okay, Mare, what just happened?
We just hit the jackpot. So we were looking for two people that we still couldn't find in the cemetery, and there was a little guy coming out of one of the catacombs, and he's like, I was waiting, I didn't want to scare you. Yeah. So I waited till you moved away from the thing, and I'm like, hey, by the way, do you happen to know where this grave is? And so he went on, pulled out a map, and he looked for it, and he's like, oh, follow me, and went and opened up the catacombs and took us down inside.
Yeah, we didn't videotape, but you got pictures.
I took a couple of pictures inside, yes, but that was amazing.
That was pretty cool.
And then I said, there was one other person that we still couldn't find yet, Mr. Crawford, and he's like, well, I know that name, I don't know where that one's. We showed him the picture, and he's like, follow me, and he took us right to it. It's right over there.
Yeah. So who is Mr. Crawford?
So he was actually involved in medicine, the practice of medicine, and he was kind of going along, kind of creating part of the germ theory, basically. He was saying that germs could cause problems, and everybody was like, nah, and they dismissed him. And it wasn't until Louis Pasteur came along later, and a couple other guys who basically said, yeah, that's how it works. And then he finally got credit.
And then the guy inside was laid the stone at the...
He was the Grand Marshal. The guy inside was the Grand Marshal of the laying of the foundation stone for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
Yeah, what was his name?
His name was Samuel Sterett, Sterett, Grand Marshal at the laying foundation stone of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in 1828.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. John Crawford over here, by the way, since I have this open, in 1800 he introduced the practice of vaccination to citizens of Baltimore during an outbreak of smallpox, and he opened the Baltimore Penitentiary. He was instrumental in the founding and opening of that. He founded the Baltimore General Dispensary, and he spread theories about microbes spreading disease. So he was pretty influential. And here he is, right there.
Pretty cool. All right. So these are the actual catacombs we got to go into. So cool. I really didn't want to whip out the video camera, though. You know, I wanted to, like I had the urgency, but okay. Mare's going to take some pictures. That was really cool.
Yeah, it was funny. He's like, so are you related to him? I'm like, no.
Yeah,
but we're from Ohio, and he laid them.
Distant uncle.
Right, before we get to the Poes, let's take a look at some of the other notable interments here at Westminster. This tomb, that of the Davies family, also includes two war veterans, John Stuart Skinner, along with his wife Elizabeth Davies Skinner, and his son Frederick Skinner. John Stuart Skinner was born in Maryland in 1788 and began his career as an attorney. He was then commissioned by President James Monroe to be the U.S. agent for prisoner exchange. When British forces moved towards Washington in 1814, Skinner rode 90 miles in the night to warn President Madison of their approach, earning his nickname Maryland's Paul Revere. In retaliation, the British burned buildings on Skinner's Street, Leonard Creek Estate. After the British burned Washington, Skinner was sent along with Georgetown lawyer Francis Scott Key to obtain the release of Dr. William Beanes, a Maryland physician captured by the British. Before leaving on this mission, Skinner acquired letters from wounded British prisoners of war describing their good treatment at the hands of the Americans. Although initially unwilling to release the doctor, British Major General Robert Ross was later persuaded after reading the letters from the wounded British prisoners. In spite of Bean's release, the 3 Americans were detained on board the British flag truce ship to keep them from reporting on the British intent to attack Baltimore. On the flagship truce, Skinner, Key, and Bean waited in painful suspense as the bombs, rockets, and cannons fired into the darkness during the British attack of Fort McHenry. When the smoke cleared on the morning of September 14th, Key, Skinner, and Beans were able to see the American flag still waving. Fort McHenry had not been taken by the British. Inspired, Key then took a letter from his pocket and began to write the verses of what would later become the Star-Spangled Banner. From 1816 until 1849, Skinner was postmaster of Baltimore, and he was buried here in Westminster Hall burying grounds with his wife and her father. His son would later be buried with them. Here's the vault for the Gilmores. Scottish-born Robert Gilmore brought his young family to Baltimore from the Eastern Shore at the onset of the Revolutionary War. Profiting from wartime shipping and industry, Gilmore emerged in the 1790s as one of Baltimore's leading merchant princes. The Gilmore Vault, probably built between 1812 and 1821, may have been designed by Robert Mills, the architect of Baltimore's Washington Monument. Now, this vault was in use until 1900. It originally held the remains of 16 family members and a family nurse. In 1885, the bodies of Robert Gilmore, his wife, and their children, along with their nurse, Patience Marsh, who was one of the only African Americans and non-church members that was buried here at Westminster, were moved to Greenmount Cemetery. Raised slabs like this one mark a number of the grave sites at Westminster, but none has garnered as much attention as this one. This bowed slab was originally part of a lot belonging to William Matthews, a merchant and Revolutionary War veteran. Once, this slab was subject of a Ripley's Believe It or Not. This gravity-defying piece of marble continues to fascinate even today. Marked here is the grave of Reverend Dr. Patrick Allison, founder and first pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Baltimore. He was the personal friend of George Washington and chaplain to the Continental Congress convened to Baltimore in 1776. Reverend Allison is remembered as a staunch defender of the principle of separation of church and state. The burying grounds here at Westminster was established originally by the First Presbyterian Church for its members. The William and Robert Smith Vault belonged to one of early Baltimore's most successful and accomplished families. William Smith followed his brother John from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Baltimore in 1761, along with other Scots-Irish flour merchant families. Smith helped to transform Baltimore from a raw town of some 1,500 into an international port city. He was also one of the founders of the First Presbyterian Church, whose members established this burying ground in 1786. Robert Smith, William's nephew, was the son of John and the older brother of Sam Smith. He became an attorney and statesman of national prominence who served as Secretary of the Navy, Attorney General under President Thomas Jefferson, and Secretary of State under James Madison. A Revolutionary War veteran and 1781 graduate of the College of New Jersey, today Princeton, Robert Smith served in Maryland's Senate and House of Delegates. After retiring from politics, he spent some 20 years as provost to the fledgling University of Maryland. The Battle of Baltimore, the heroic stand against the British forces in September of 1814, has long ranked among Baltimore's greatest achievements. Among the battle's many heroes was this individual, John Stricker, a native of Maryland's Frederick County, bank president, and eventually beloved war hero. As commander of the militia brigade, Stricker stalled the British infantry advance at the Battle of North Point. When British naval bombardment failed to take Fort McHenry, the fate of Baltimore and the nation was secure. He's quoted as saying, "And I feel pride in the belief that the stand made on Monday, in no small degree, tended to check the temerity of the foe daring to invade a country like ours and designing the destruction of our city." Relative newcomer to what would become the United States was James McHenry, a native of Ireland who immigrated to Philadelphia in 1771, where he studied medicine with Benjamin Rush, one of colonial America's most respected and influential physicians. Dr. McHenry served in the American Revolution, first as a military surgeon and later on staffs for General George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette. In 1787, McHenry signed the U.S. Constitution as a member of the Continental Congress from Maryland. He served as Secretary of War under Presidents Washington and Adams, remaining a staunch Federalist until his death in 1816. The famed Fort McHenry would eventually be built and named in his honor. Here are buried James McHenry, his wife Margaret Allison Caldwell, and 3 of his 6 children, Margaretta McHenry, Daniel William McHenry, and Anna McHenry Boyd, along with one of his grandchildren, James McHenry Boyd. It may or may not surprise you that there are more than one Poe buried here in the Westminster burial grounds. David Poe, Edgar's grandfather, was one of this cemetery's original plot owners. A native of Ireland, David came to the American colonies as an infant and moved his family to Baltimore in around 1755. He served the revolutionary cause in the state militia as a soldier and also as a quartermaster, earning the gratitude and respect of his fellow citizens, who later bestowed upon him the honorific title of general. He later served in the War of 1812 and the Battle of North Point, volunteering at the age of 71. Though her grave is unmarked, buried beside David is his wife, Elizabeth Cairns Poe. Like her husband, Elizabeth was of Irish ancestry, but was born in Pennsylvania. She also shared her husband's dedication to liberty during the Revolution. During Lafayette's celebrated American tour of 1824, the Marquis mentioned the Poes by name and remembered them for their service to fund and clothe his troops. The couple had 7 children, 2 of whom died in infancy. David Poe Jr., Edgar's father, was their 4th child. William Henry Leonard Poe, like his brother Edgar, had literary inclinations. His tale, The Pirate, was published in 1827, well before any of the short stories written by his famous younger sibling, and he is interred here in an unmarked grave. Some of the other Poe family that's buried here were covered or moved when Westminster Hall was built in 1852. Just inside the catacombs, you can find the family plot of George Poe Jr. And now, to the mysterious interment of the macabre poet Edgar Allan Poe, his cousin/wife, and aunt/mother-in-law. When Poe died of mysterious circumstances in 1849 at age 40, he was originally interred in an unmarked grave between his grandfather and the Reverend Patrick Allison. Now in 1860, a note from Maria Clem to Edgar's cousin Nielsen indicated that she was concerned over the state of Edgar's grave. Nielsen assured her he would have it taken care of and actually then planned to put a marker on his grave. He ordered a marble headstone, and it was in the process of being carved by Hugh Sisson, and due to the weight of stones and the difficulty of moving them, the monument yard was right next to a railroad line. But before it was installed, The recently completed stone was destroyed in which a train actually ran off the tracks and directly through the yard. Now, not being a wealthy man, Nielsen decided not to order another one, so he continued to go without a grave marker. Sometime between 1865 and 1873, it was decided, apparently mutually but separately, by Miss Rice, who was a school teacher in Baltimore City, and Paul Hamilton Haney, who was a poet, there needed to be a marker for Poe. And so they worked to raise funds to purchase one. Miss Rice's students actually did events and raised money through a Pennies for Poe project. They didn't raise enough money, however. The total cost of the monument was slightly over $1,500, so they ended up getting the final $650 donated by a philanthropist from Philadelphia named George W. Childs. Money in hand, the design was entrusted to architect George A. Frederick, and it was built by none other than Hugh Sisson. They also decided to add a medallion of Poe to the front of the monument. This was created by a Baltimorean artist named Valek from an oil painting of Poe, which was owned by his cousin Nielsen's son, John. In order to prepare a foundation for the large monument, it was decided that they needed to move Poe's body, and they moved it and placed it in the grave that was occupied by Mrs. Clem, who had died in 1871 and wished to be buried in the Poe plot near Edgar, or as she called him, her Eddie. George W. Spence, who actually was the sexton in charge of Poe's initial burial in 1849 and eventually placed the sandstone marker that marked 80 on his grave for identification purposes, directed this first exhumation as well. Now, eventually, a plan was made and agreed upon to move the newly constructed monument for Poe and Poe's body from the rear of the churchyard to the front, which would then occupy portions of lots 174 and 180, as the church, which was built in the 1850s, would have blocked the view of the grave from the street if Poe was left in his grandfather's lot. So, securing the permission from the descendants of the original owners of lots 174 and 180, once more, Poe's body was exhumed and moved, as well as was Mrs. Clem's. Once again, George W. Spence, who had buried Poe in 1849 and was there for the exhumation 1, was also there for the exhumation and reburial in 1875. He was also present there during the monument dedication, which was dedicated on November 17th of 1875. Some of those in attendance were actually Judge Nielsen Poe, Edgar's cousin, and Walt Whitman. There were also letters from Longfellow, Whittier, Bryant, and Alfred Tennyson, which were read. The Baltimore Philharmonic Society also played and sang as well. And Professor William Elliott Jr., president of Baltimore City College, made a principal address. And when it came time to reveal the new monument, Miss Rice, who had worked tirelessly to help raise the funds, and Professor Elliott were the ones who actually removed the cloth. And then a floral tribute in the shape of a raven was placed on the tomb by some of the acting company from Ford's Grand Opera House in Baltimore to honor Poe's mother, who had been an actress in the Holiday Street Theater. With that, Poe had been placed in his third and final burial place, and the remains of his aunt/mother-in-law, Mrs. Clem, were placed there as well. Now, it would be nearly 10 years before his wife Virginia, who died of tuberculosis in 1847 and originally buried in Fordham, New York, in the Dutch Presbyterian churchyard, would be brought here to lie and rest next to her husband, Edgar. Her remains were reburied in January of 1885 after being rescued by a gentleman named William F. Gill, who had brought them from Fordham in New York after visiting the cemetery in 1883 and seeing that the cemetery was being razed. And since no one was there to claim Virginia's remains, they were basically going to be just shoveled and thrown away. He decided that they should be buried with Edgar. So the sexton, Dennis Valentine, helped him to collect Virginia's bones, and Gill then took them to his home in New York and corresponded with Nielsen Poe and had the box of bones brought down to be placed in a bronze casket and laid next to Edgar. Now, with Virginia to his left and his aunt/mother-in-law, Mrs. Clem, to his right, the three of them were now reunited in death. On his monument is actually wrong. It's marked as the 20th, and he actually was born on the 19th. But they just decided to leave it as it was. But wait, there's more. You thought that that was strange enough and a lot of movement. In 1912, Orrin C. Painter decided that there should be a new entrance near Edgar's grave, his current one. And so he had a new entrance placed right there up front by Edgar's grave. In 1913, he decided that he should place another stone that would be there to mark Poe's original burial site near the rear of the church. Now, for some reason or another, this stone was originally put completely outside of the Poe plot, and it wasn't until 1921 that they actually moved it to its current location. Even stranger than that, it still seems to be in the wrong place. It's marked as the first location for Poe's grave. However, this current location also seems to be a little bit incorrect. It's closer, but still incorrect, according to the First Church's records from 1872, which has a drawing of the plot where Edgar is not in that spot. He's between his grandfather and the Reverend, which are on the opposite end of the Poe plot. In any case, I guess it's close.
All right, so just real quick, from the front along the side where you can look at the church, underneath that center section where it has like that opening, you go under there and just to the right on the other side of the back pillar, that's where John Crawford is located. And then Mr. Sterrett, he is, if we go this part of the church here, the tall part, about halfway back, he's underneath the church there. That is just so cool. This is like the area where they're at.
There's all kinds of graves under the church.
There are. It's amazing.
We were down there. You got pictures, right?
I took a couple of pictures. I didn't want to be too obtrusive, but since
we should have just asked. He probably would have said, yeah, go ahead.
He probably would have.
Guy was really cool.
He was very cool. Thank you so much if you're ever watching.
Okay.
Before we end this video, we of course need to discuss some of the reported paranormal activity for this location. The Westminster Hall and Burying Grounds is filled with ghostly lore and mysterious happenings. Built over a historic burial ground, the 19th century church rests atop crypts and catacombs that have long been the focus of eerie tales. Visitors often report strange footsteps echoing in empty corridors, cold drafts with no source, and whispers coming from the shadows. The combination of the old graves and the underground tunnels creates the perfect environment for lingering spirits. One of the most chilling legends involves the Screaming Skull, said to belong to a murdered man whose shrieks disturbed the area nightly. His skull was supposedly encased in concrete to silence the haunting cries, but many still claim to hear the wails in the dead of night. These cries are usually described as muffled yet anguished, seemingly to come from beneath the ground. Some believe disturbing his resting place awakens the spirit once more. Another well-known spirit is that of Lucia Watson Taylor, a teenage girl who died young in the early 1800s. Witnesses have seen a young woman in a flowing white dress kneeling by a grave, her long hair draped over her face. She never speaks and vanishes when approached. Her presence is usually accompanied by a sudden stillness and cold breeze, and many believe she is mourning her untimely death. The ghost of a grumpy old caretaker is also said to haunt the graveyard. He appears when people act disrespectfully near the tombs or try to disturb the area. Stories include phantom yelling, the story of keys jingling, and even people being pushed or rushed at by an invisible force. Locals believe that the caretaker continues his duty long after death, safeguarding the sacred grounds. Perhaps the most famous haunting is that of Edgar Allan Poe himself. His spirit has been seen standing by his grave, sometimes walking through the burial ground in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Mysterious activity near his final resting place includes flickering lights, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. Some believe his soul remains tied to the site, to the tragic circumstances of his death and the secrecy surrounding his final days.
All right, Westminster Presbyterian Church and Cemetery.
Yes.
What do you think?
So very cool. We went there to find specific people. We ended up finding them all, some with a little help.
We got to go into the catacombs.
Got to go into the catacombs,
Edgar
which you're
Allan
not
Poe.
supposed to be able to do except on, I think it's like the first Friday or the first Saturday of the month they do tours where you can go in there. But
There's a church over there.
it was so cool. And I got a mark.
A souvenir.
Yes. So it was very cool. We saw so many important big figures that are in there in just this little cemetery that's underneath the church.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Anything else you want to add?
I think that about sums it up,
Yeah,
right?
we're excited. So now we got to hike back to our hotel.
That's right.
All right, folks. Till next time.
Thanks for watching.
And happy hunting.
Let us know if you like this video by hitting that thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, support our channel by hitting that subscribe button and dinging that bell so you get notified the next time there's a video from Panic D Videos.
Thanks for watching.
Happy hunting!